Good evening. Today's blot in Gittin is going to be Daf Yud Aleph. We're going to begin. We started this a little bit yesterday. Just to recap on Daf Yud Amud Beis, we'll start from Reb Shimon Aimer Af Elu Kshin. So that we brought from the Mishnah that the Tanakama said with regards to all documents produced in Goyish courts, in Gentile courts, even though their signatures are those of Goyim, so the Mishnah said is ksherim or kosher, except for either a get or a shichrurei avadim, gittin nashim or shichrurei avadim. According to the Tanakama, if Goyim are signed on this documents, it is puzzle. Reb Shimon said, af elu ksherim, these are valid as well. These two types of documents are valid. And then Reb Shimon threw a line saying that lehuskuru ela bizman shenasu behedit, that the only time that these documents are puzzle is only when they are prepared by common people. In other words, not the Beis Din. That's what we learned yesterday. And okay. So now the Gemara says, Reb Shimon says, af elu kshedim, that these, in other words, like we said, that in regards to a get or shichrurei avadim, they are also valid. That if they are written in a goyish court and were signed by goyim, so the din is that it's going to be kosher. So asks the Gemara, v'halav b'nei krisis ninu, but goyim are not fit. L'chayr are not fit for this role. Why? Because they are not b'nei krisis. The Gemara learns out that in order for someone to actually sign on a get, he has to be subject to the halachas concerning a get. So since these people are not subject to either the get, so how could they sign on this get? How could Reb Shimon say that if you have a document that Goyim sign on it, it's going to be a kosher get? So Amar Reb Zera says, Yared Reb Shimon l'shitasa Reb Elazar. Reb Shimon follows the opinion of Reb Elazar, who says the Amar Eidim Mesirei Karti, who holds that the witnesses of the transmission of the get, they affect the divorce. As we said a few times already, there's a big machlekes. What affects the get? Is it Eidei Mesira or Eidei Chasima? Is it the signatures on the get, or is it the signatures, or is it the Eidim that actually see the process, the man giving the get? So Reb Elazar's shita is that it's Eidei Mesira Karti. So when Reb Shimon says that Eidim that are signed on the get, it's kosher, it's not a problem, because he holds that what affects the get, this is the Eidei, the witnesses who actually witnessed the transmission. Now, the Gemara asks, one second. Reb Abba says that Reb Abba says that Reb Abba agrees that when you have a document and you have a falsification in the actual document, so then it's puzzle. In other words, yes, you're right that Eidim Mesir Karti, but when you have the actual document and the document itself is invalid, it's Mesuyif Miteiche, it's false inside. So even Rabbi Elazar will agree that this get is puzzle. So l'chayra, if it's mezuyif meteiche, he will agree that you can't use these witnesses. Now, why can't you use these witnesses? So Rashi says is because it's a gzeira midrabanan, it's a decree midrabanan. We're worried that the Chacham were worried that said that if you could use edim that are non-kosher in a get, even though edim is karti, so l'chayra, why can't you use these edim that are written in the actual shtar? So Rashi says is because I'm worried that people will think that I can use the edim as well for to be the edim mesira, which is not true. Which is, we know you need kosher edim. So the Gemara answers and says, "Hachamay what are we dealing with? Okay, this is where we're holding Daf Yud Aleph. B'shemes muvakin. B'shemes muvakin. It means, like Rashi says, it's mamish goyish names that it's like the Yidden don't even have these type of names. And since this get over here is talking about Eidim that have Goyish names, so the gzeira of being worried that perhaps the Yidden or people who are involved in the get will use the same Eidim to be Eidim Mesira, that's never going to happen because everybody knows that these Eidim that are signed are Goyish people. So then the Gemara said, Hey Chidam Yeshemis Muvakin. What is an example of Goyish names that it's impossible to make a mistake that to think you can use them for Eidim Mesira? So the Gemara says, Amar Papa, Kagain Hormiz, Vaftuna, Bar Shvito, Bar Kidro, Bativinakamuna, all these cases. So now the Gemara says, and this is where we left off yesterday, Aval Shemesh Enu Muvakin Mai. So what will come out if you have, let's say on a get, or you have on a shtar shichur, or if you have goyish witnesses, but the names are not so goyish. You can perhaps translate it that it's goyim. You didn't also use these type of names. So the question is, what will come out? It will come out that in such a case, that such a get or shtar shichar that the edim write on it, the chayr will come out that it's puzzle because only it has to be. You're saying that our case is shemus muvakim, but what about shemus she'enim muvakim? It will come out that you cannot use such a get. So ask the Gemara, if that's really true. So adatani seifa that the seifa, the end of the Mishnah said, it says in the seifa of the Mishnah that that they only taught that when goyim sign on a shtar, it's puzzle, is if it's a common goyim, in other words, not goyim from the court. So now he asks, based on that, why don't you just say clearly, very simple? The Mishnah should have said, when do I say that you could use goyim according to Rabbi Shimon b'shemus muvakin when it comes to names that are mamish goyim, and it's nobody will mistaken that you could use them for the get. But when it comes out to names which are ambiguous names, no, goyim are not valid. So why doesn't the Mishnah just say it? Say it very clearly. So the Gemara says, this is also what he's saying. In other words, Rav Shimon's saying that the get and the shtar shichar are also going to be valid as well. The medvan or murim when b'shemus muvakin, al b'shemus she'en muvakin. So you have to say in your own words that when do I say that Rav Shimon will say that goyim are kosher to sign on the get? That's when the names are mamash goyish names. But if it's not goyish names, then the halacha would be nasa kemi shenasa behedyit. Then it will become like one who prepared by a common person, not by the goyish court, upsulan, and therefore such documents are going to be puzzle. That's one answer. The second answer is seifon asor the Gittin moment. He says you should know that the end of the Mishnah is not speaking about Gittin. It's speaking about financial documents, and really, it's not even the end of the Mishnah is not even Reb Shimon's words. That when we say that when Shimon says that by Gittin Nashim, which Edim are written on there, it's kosher. Here the Mishnah is speaking about it's going back to the Tanakama's words, and it's saying that when it comes to documents, monetary documents, which produced in the Goyish courts in the Arkois, that's going to be kosher. So again, V'ibay Sema Seven Asa on the Gittin moment, that the Seifa is speaking about financial documents, and like we said, that this clause is not a B'Shimon's statement, it's returning to the Tanakama. And this is what the Mishnah is saying. That the Mishnah is saying that when it comes to financial documents, were mentioned that when it comes to financial documents that are produced by the Goyish courts, it's invalid only when they were prepared by common people. But if they were produced by, according to Tanakama, when it comes to financial documents, if they're produced by the Goyish courts, then it should be kosher, according to the second answer. Okay, Tanya, we learned in Rabbi S. This is a Tosefta. Now, this Tosefta, it's a middle of the statement. The Tosefta is brought down. It says that all shtaris, before I read inside, just we have to know a little bit of background. All shtaris, all documents which come from a Goyish court, even though the Goyim sign on this document, so the halacha is that Rabbi Kiva says it's kosher, and the Chachamim say it's pasul b'Gittin Nashim u'shechuri avodim. So it comes out that Rav Shimon in our Mishnah is really and goes like Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so now based on this we can understand the next part of the brisa. Tanya, then the brisa Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yasi. Elazar Rabbi Yasi, the son of Rabbi Yasi, said, Kach Amar Rabbi Shimon l'Chachamim. B'Tzaydon, this is what Rabbi Shimon said to the Chachamim in the city of Tzaydon, that Rabbi Akiva v'Chachamim al kol ashtaris ha'edim bar koyishul goyim, that Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, like Rashi says, that they lived in the generation beforehand. So Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim did not argue in regards to documents
which were produced from a goyish court, even though when you have documents that have goyish signatures, it's kshedim, it's kosher. And even when it comes to the get of a woman or shechure avodim, the only argument is when they were prepared outside of Beis Din by a common person. That Rabbi Akiva is going to hold that such a document is valid, and the Chachamim praised them, and the Chachamim hold that it's possible. Except for either Gittin Daf and Shechure Avadim, that it will be possible. So again, that he says that Rabbi Akiva and the Nechel Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, in regards to shtaris that are produced in Goyish court, that even though Goyim are written on it, it's still going to be okay, even Gittin Daf and Shechure Avadim, and they're only arguing when it's done outside of court, that people just wrote up their own documents. So Rabbi Akiva holds that it's kosher, and the Chacham say it's puzzle, except for Gittin Daf and Shechure Avadim. Now, Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af elu, which means even these, even the Gittin Daf and the Shechure Avadim, kshedim b'makim she'ein Yisrael chaytmin. They're valid in a place where Yidden do not sign. In other words, the halacha that a document with goyish signatures is valid applies only in a place where Yidden are not allowed to sign. So in a place where I guess they had there's halachas that Yidden were not allowed to sign, so everybody knows that who signed on the document is Goyim. So in other words, everybody knows that goyish documents are not signed by Yidden. Now, in a place where Yidden do sign, then these documents are not valid either. Why? Because people will think that Yidden signed this divorce. So therefore there's a concern that a person might, like we said, deliver this divorce in the presence of those witnesses who are actually Goyim, which would make the get puzzle. So we have three opinions over here. We have we said that when it comes to Goyish documents, that Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim only argue in when the Goyish documents were produced by not in court. Rabbi Akiva holds it's kosher, Chacham holds it's possible, except for Gittin Daf and Shechure Avadim. And Shimon ben Gamliel is going to say is that even these documents that were produced by Goyim are kosher when everybody knows that Goyim do not sign on. That Yidden don't sign on shtaris. So everybody's going to say that everybody knows that who are the people that sign on it are non-Jews. So nobody will mistake to use the non-Jews as Eidei Mesira. Ashenkin, when it comes to a place that Yidden do sign, then we do not use this document because people will think that you could use the Eidim that are signed as Eidei Mesira, which really are Goyim. No, these days we have a get. Right. Okay, so now the Gemara says, "But makom she'en Yisrael chaysman nami." So the Gemara suggests, let us also decree in a place where Yidden do not sign on documents. Ligzer atu makom she'Yisrael chaysman. We should make a decree in a place where Yidden do sign. So the Gemara answers, "Shema b'shema mechalif." One might confuse one name with another name. In other words, it's possible that one might think that a certain name is that of a Yid when it's actually of a Goy. But Asra ba'asra, when it comes to confuse a place to another place, that people are not going to confuse. So everybody knows that all of the signatures in certain places belong to Goyim, so they're careful not to do the Eidei Mesira in the presence of the witnesses who signed it, because everybody knows that in that place, Yidden don't sign. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Ravina Savar Lachshure Bechnufiyosa Darma. Ravina thought to deem valid a document that was written by a group of Goyim. Amarle Arafram Arkois Tanan. So Arafram said to him that we learned it has to be Goyish courts. In other words, in the Mishnah, these documents are valid only if they are produced by like an important court, not by any group of Goyim. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Hai Shtora Parsae, with regards to this Persian document. In other words, it was a document that was written by the Persian authorities, the Masri Nahale Ba'apei Sadi Yisrael, that was transferred to the recipient in the presence of Jewish witnesses. So the halacha is Magbinim Bei Mibnei Chara he can collect it with non-liened property. In other words, property that does not have a mortgage. It's called nechasim mishubadim. So, although this is not considered a proper document by means that a person could actually use this document to collect nechasim mishubadim, but he could collect from any land sold by. Nevertheless, the fact that these documents are considered accurate, so at least a person could use this to collect other things, not nechasim mishubadim, but at least he can collect other nechasim. Okay, so the Gemara asks for halo yodi the mikri, but the witnesses who saw the transmission of the get, they do not know how to read Persian, because as we know, most Yidden don't know the language of Persian. So how can they be witnesses? So the Gemara says bidi yodi. The Gemara's Rav is referring to a case where the witnesses know how to read Persian. Now, the Gemara questions now, how can the Beis Din rely on such a document? But you have another problem. You have that you require that the documents be written in a way that it cannot be forged. And it's not so in this document, because Persians were not, as we know, were not very particular in preparing the documents legally, and there's a lot of forgery going on. So the Gemara answers and says, but the afitzon, that they used the it's called gal, it's like a galnut juice, and that is very hard, it's impossible to really forge such a document. But you have another din, but I require that the documents review the essential topic of the document in its last line. In other words, every get or every document has to have the last line like a summary of the get. So by the Persian Gittin, by the Persian documents, you don't have this. So the Gemara answers and says, "B'min dehadar." Rava's statement applies in a case where it returned to review the essential topics of the document in the final line. So, if that's really so, let him collect nechasim mishubadim. So the Gemara answers, lest they kala. This document does not generate kol, publicity. In other words, a legal matter that is performed by the Persians courts will not become publicized amongst Yidden, and therefore. This case is similar to like a milva balpeh, where since you don't have a kol, in this case the lender can collect only from nechasim which are not mishubadim, but nechasim mishubadim he cannot collect. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, we're holding Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, the last line, Boy Minei Reish Lakish Min Rabbi Yechanan. So now Boy Minei Reish Lakish Min Rabbi Yechanan, Reish Lakish raised a dilemma before his brother-in-law Rabbi Yechanan. What was the question? The question was, Eidim hachsum alaget ushmaisen kishmais goyim. He says, in regards to you have witnesses who signed on a get, but their names are like the names of goyim. So he asked them, what's the halacha? So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yechanan said to him, Lei bali yodenu ela loikis velus. There came before us this get that were signed only with names such as Lucas and Los, which were like goyish names. And the Irsharnu, and we said that it's a valid by means of the witnesses, by Eidei Masira. So the Gemara says that the Dafka, Lucas Velus, Dafka, this applies specifically to the names of Lucas and Lus. It's very uncommon for Yidden to have called by these names. In other words, even let's say very non-religious Jews are not like. You're not going to find a Yid, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a name. You'll never have even like a Goyish name or a Yid that will be called, I don't know, Lucas or, I don't know, Muhammad. You're not going to find that by Yidden. So when it comes to names which Mamish are not L'Shichi Yisrael, so then the names that are signed on there, you'll never use those Eidim or to think that you could use them for Eidim Masira. Aval Shmahosa Achrina, the Shichi Yisrael, the Mask B'Shmayu. But with regards to Goyish names, which is common to find Yidden who are called by these names, then the documents are not used. Again, because the sin, like Rashi says, the Gzeira is that people might mistakenly rely on these signatures of the Goyim. So that's what he answered. That's what Rabbi Yechanan answered his brother-in-law Rish Lakish. So now Esvei Rish Lakish raised a shaila from the following brisa. What does the brisa say? Gittin abom medinas hayom. If you have Gittin, which come from overseas, ve'edim chsum aleim, and you have edim that are written on this get. So alpha pishish meisem kishmeis goyim. The Brisa says even though the names are like the names of a goyim, kshedim, it's kosher. Why? Why? Because the names of most of the Yidden outside of Eretz Yisrael all like the names of the Goyim, which the Chayra implies that a get is valid even when the names are not clearly those of Goyim. Right? It says clearly, the Afal Pisha Shemaisem Kishmais Goyim, they're kosher because Roiv Yisrael Shebechutz La'aretz Shemaisem Kishmais Goyim, which could mean that even the names which are not clearly those of Goyim, the Chayra still work. It's a fair Shabraisa. So the Gemara answers and says, Hassam, there, Allah is very different. Why? Like the teaches the reasons clearly. It says clearly because most of the names outside of Eretz Yisrael are like the names of Goyim. So it can be assumed that the court examined the matter at the timing of the signing, and the documents were signed by Yidden. However, in Eretz Yisrael, it's more likely that these names are actually those of Goyim, and therefore a document of this kind is valid only when it's clear that it was signed by Goyim to avoid these mistakes. Okay, then the Gemara brings another discussion. Another way to learn it. Ki masnisim boyimine, that there are those who say that Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan about the same cases in the Brisa, upashalim masnisin, and he resolved this from the Brisa that even though the names signed on a get brought from outside of Yisrael are like the names of a Goyim, they are still going to be valid, still going to be kosher. Okay. Now we're going to start another Mishnah, Dafid Aleph and Aleph by the Mishnah Ha'imr. Okay, so now just to give a little introduction to the Mishnah, that just like a man could appoint a shliach, like we said the last few Mishnahs, to make a shliach le'ilacha, so too a woman could also appoint a shliach for herself to receive the get. That's called a shliach leKabbalah. Now, in a scenario that the shliach gives the get to the wife's hand, to the wife's hand, so the halacha is that the wife is divorced immediately. Now, in regards to the shliach leKabbalah, if the husband or the shliach receives let's say the husband gives her shliach, the shliach leKabbalah gives her a get, so she's going to be divorced automatically. And the same thing would apply to shechurei avadim. Now, in regards to money, a person could make a kinyan for his friend, even though his friend did not tell him to do so, because we have a din, right? Zachan adam shlei b'fanav. A person could make a schiyah for his friend, even when he never asked him. Okay, so now the Mishnah is going to give a very interesting case of what happened. Was like this: Ha'omer 10 get zeli ishti. A shliach le'ilacha now, a man says to a shliach le'ilacha, give this bill of divorce to my wife. Or shtar shichrur zel avdi, or give the shtar shichrur to my husband, to my servant. So the halacha is like this: Im ratza lachzer b'shneim, if let's say the husband or the master, it didn't reach yet the woman or the slave's hand, so the giver, he wants to retract his decision. So the halacha is, in Ratza Lachzer B'Shneim Yachzer, Kol Zman, the woman didn't actually get either the get or the slave didn't get the shtar shichrur, so if the guy changed his mind, he could retract. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Now, the Chachamim say no. The Gittin Nashim, this husband could retract when it comes to get of a woman. But not when it comes to a get shikhr. Why? What's the svara? Because we know there's a famous din that a person could do a favor for somebody else, even not in his presence, because you assume that the guy wants the favor. Right? If I see $100 and I want to go pick it up for you, I don't need to call you, Udi, can I go pick up $100? Of course. But the din is, but when a person acts, let's say, for a detriment, as a chayiv, that can only be done in a person's presence. So, like this. The person is now, let's say, shliach le'ilacha is becoming a shliach to receive for the woman. Or let's say the shliach le'kabbalah, let's say the shliach le'ilacha. He's giving the shliach now, and the shliach is going to now do something for the woman. So, when it comes to a get, that's a detriment for the woman. Most women, they want to be married, husband wants the woman want to be sustained by the wife. So by this guy acting as a shliach, you can't say that it's a good for the woman. The woman wants to stay married. Mashenkin, when it comes to the shtar shichrur, that's a schia for the man. Why is it a schia for the eved? Why? Because what's it called? The servant wants to be free. So that's what he says. He says that ein chavon adel b'fanav shem yirtzu shlei lozen es avdei. Now he says like this. So that's one answer. One thing is he says is that it's a big difference. The Rameir says is that stai gittin nashim, stai shechur avadim. If a guy makes a shliach le'ilacha and says, "Hey, shliach le'ilacha, wait, I changed my mind," the whole get is batal, the whole shtar shechur is batal. Now the Chacham say it depends. When it comes to gittin nashim, he.
Or he can say, okay, freeze for 1 day or 2 days.
Are you asking if he has to? If he has to, I think
when
it's.
he says stop, it's going to be bottle.
Yeah, batal.
Again, new one, or it can.
So I don't know about a new get, but for sure, he has to appoint the shliach again. But the point is, I don't know. It's a good question, but the point is that when it comes to the get of the nashim, he could retract the get. Why? Because the shliach now we say zachan adam shlei b'fanav ve'ein chavin. So for the get, for him to be the shliach, it's a detriment for the wife. So we say, okay, hold off. But for the shtar shichrur, the fact is the guy's a shliach. So zachan adam shlei b'fanav. Yeah. Now he says even furthermore. He says that when it comes to shtar shichrur, really, even though that when it comes usually to a servant and a master, the master has to sustain the servant, but really the din is shem yirtzu shlei lozen es avdei. If the master wishes not to sustain his slave, the halacha is he's allowed to. He does not have to provide him sustenance. So what do we see from here? We see that it's not really a benefit. He's not really guaranteed to have sustenance or have muzin his whole life. Why? Because at any time, and we're going to learn like this in a minute what this means, but at any time the master can tell the servant, the slave, that I don't want to provide for you any more sustenance.
What?
Okay. Rashi. Ushaloi lozen es ishtei, but if the husband wishes not to sustain his wife, so the halacha is, in Rashi, he's not allowed to proceed in this manner. So what do we see? We see that when it comes to gittin, to marriage, it's basically the interest of the woman not to be divorced. Okay, Amar Lahem. So the mayor says to the Chachamim, but you have another problem. V'harei, you're saying that when it comes to get the nashim, that's a chavin, but when it comes to ashar shikhr, that's zachan adam shlei b'fanav. But the question is, Amar Lahem. But the mayor said, v'harei hu peislas avdim natruma. But even so, the master by the shliach giving a shtar shikhr, or being the shliach for the shtar shikhr, he disqualifies his slave from partaking of truma by freeing him. Kishem shu peislas ishtei, just as a husband who's a kohen disqualifies his wife, if she's Israelite, from partaking of truma if they're divorced. So we also see that you could find a hechetimtzi, you could find a case that the shliach could make a detriment for the eved as well. So my answer is Amar Loi. So the Chacham said to him, it's permitted for a kohen slave to partake of truma, not because the Odin has the right, not because the guy has rights to sustenance, but because he is his master's acquisition, and since his mifnei is like Rashi says, the fact that he could passel, that the get could passel from truma, is because till now he was the acquisition of the kohen. The Gemara Mefarish might come, the Gemara is going to explain exactly what this means. Okay, so basically, just to do a summary of the Mishnah, we said that if a person says 10 get zeli ishti, give this get to my wife, or shtar shikhr zela avdi. So if he wants, according to Tanakama, if he wants, he could retract, he could pull back the shliach le'ilacha from giving the get or the shtar shikhr. And this is Rameir says, and the Chacham says, when it comes to Gittin Nashim, he can pull back, but Shechuri Avodim he can't. Why? So he says one answer is So since for the shtar shichur, it's a schus for him to get out of his slavery. So we say that when he gave it to the shliach halacha, it's chal right away, and he cannot take it back. But when it comes to the get, that's chavan adam shlei b'fanav. So therefore, you mamish need the wife there. And kolzman, the wife didn't get it. The husband can pull back because the whole shlichus is batal. And then the Mishnah said furthermore as well that if the odin, the master wants, he could tell the servant, I'm not sustaining you anymore. But he can't tell it to the wife. A person cannot tell his wife, I'm not giving you any more. Part of the ksuba is that you have to sustain your wife. Okay, so then the Chacham said to the mayor, your mayor said back to the Chacham, but you have another problem, that if by taking the shtar shichur, this guy is puzzled from, he can't eat any more truma. Just like when a woman gets divorced, can't eat any truma. So the Chacham said the fact that the husband, that the servant can eat truma has nothing to do that there's a chiyuv of sustenance, but rather mefneshu kinyana, which the Gemara will explain what that means. Okay. So the Gemara, Yosef Rabbi Huna, Rabbi Yisrael Bar Yosef, Kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah, v'Yosef, v'kamen enamnim. V'Yosef Rabbi Yirmiyah v'kamen enamnim. So what happened was the Gemara relates that Rabbi Huna and Rabbi Yitzchok Bar Yosef were sitting before Rabbi Yirmiyah, and Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting and dozing off. He started to fall asleep. And these other two Talmidei Chachamim, Rav Huna and Rav Yitzchak, were discussing the halachas. Now, Yosef Rav Huna v'ka'amar, Rav Huna was sitting and saying that Shma mina midrabanan, that with regards to the statement of the Chachamim that a adon cannot, when it comes that an adon gives the shliach leilach the shtar shichur, once he's given it to the shliach, he cannot retract. So from here, Rav Huna says Shma mina midrabanan. You can learn from here that a person can conclude from here that if a third party seizes a debt, a property for someone else on behalf of the creditor, so the chayra should come out that that again, that if a person seizes, a third party now seizes debt property on behalf of the creditor, so he acquires this property on his behalf. This is similar to the case where the shliach acquires the shtar shichur on behalf of the slave, just like you have by the case of the shliach leilacha, that he's becoming the shliach, he's a third party over here, and we're saying that the second that he gets the shtar shichur, the odin is already he's set free. So it will come out that from the words of the Chachamim that if let's say you know that Reuven and Shimon are having a fight, and Reuven says, Shimon, you owe me money, and Shimon doesn't want to pay. So Levi can come now and take away from Shimon. The Chayra can come away and take away Shimon's property and give it back to Reuven. Why? Because we see that from our Mishnah, we see that person Zachan Adam Shlei B'Fanav. And there's a big machlekes if Atefis the Balchev, if there's a third party, if he seizes the property away from one of the from let's say the Balchev, so that it's a whole machlekes if it works or not. L'chayr from our Mishnah will come out that the fact that this shtar shichur, this guy could be a shliach for the servant, it will work. So the chayr zachan adam shalei b'fanav, it could work. Atefis the Balchev is kana. So, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef said to Rav Huna, you think the halach is even in a case when you're seizing the property and it's a detriment to other people. In other words, let's say there's a few creditors over there. So if you have a few creditors and this chaverman is taking it away for one creditor, the other creditors get messed over. So you're telling me that it works even shechav la'achenim?
There's probably priority.
Well,
there's probably priority. Which creditor comes first?
For sure, but what if there's no priority? What if they all gave the loan at the same time? Or
he has to show that he has a previous.
Okay, right, but let's say they can't. Let's say they can't prove that.
Why not? It's all registered. I mean, there's a code. There's a code.
So let's say there's no code. Okay, so let's see. So Amar Lei, so he says that yes, there is. He could be tevis the balchev, even if it's going to hurt other people. So now, in the meantime, Rabbi Yirmiyah woke up due to the conversation. In other words, like we said, he wasn't sleeping. He wasn't sleeping very deeply. So Amar Lahu, so he said like this: Dardiki, he says, children. He told them, listen, kinderlach, listen. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, he says if a person seizes property on behalf of a creditor in a case where it is a detriment to other people, so the halacha is loikona, he does not acquire. Im Taimar, and he says, and if you're going to say from the Mishnah, Mishnah Seinu, it apparently teaches the opposite. We see that a shliach can acquire with the shtar shichur, he can get the slave free, despite the fact that it causes a loss to the master. So this case is different. Why is this case different? Because kol ha'imr tenu, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, anyone who says the words tenu, give, he's basically saying ko'imer, he's saying like zuchu dami. That tenu and zuchu, by saying tenu, give, you're basically saying also acquire. So since the master says tenu, give this shtar shichur to my slave, the shliach immediately acquires it on behalf of the slave, despite the fact that the shtar shichur will be a detriment to the master. Now, this halacha has nothing to do where a person independently seizes property on behalf of the other, and by doing so, he acts as a disadvantage for other people. In other words, in our case, when he says tenu, what are you saying? You're saying tenu is basically you're saying zachu. So once he says zachu, then the agent, the shliach, immediately acquires on the slave's behalf, even though it could be a detriment, because by the odin saying tenu, you're basically saying zuchu, so you can't really retract it. Okay, weiter. Omer Reb Chizda. Yeah, the line starts with Koimer. Omer Reb Chizda. It's the bottom of Daf Aleph on the base. Omer Reb Chizda says, "Hatefes the balchei b'makom shachav la'achenim." So he says like this, with regards to this that we just discussed, that a person who seizes property on behalf of a creditor in a case where it's a detriment to others, so then he says like this, Banu l'machlekes Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan. Really, we arrive to a machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Now, what's the machlekes? It's a very interesting Mishnah. The Mishnah says in Peah, Misha liket esa Peah, a person, the halacha is Peah, the corners of the field, they belong to the Aniyim. So what happened is this person who's not a poor person, he started collecting produce in the corner of the field. So he was malaka de peah, v'amar, and he said, "Harizel pleni ani." I have a friend, I have a cousin, my neighbor is a poor person. I am going to collect the produce, this corner of the field. I'm going to give it to the poor person.
Ploni specific at that ploni?
Yeah, he said.
You can't do that.
Okay, 1 second. So let's see. So he says, "Harizel pleni." So Rabbi Eliezer says, "Zachalai," and Rabbi Eliezer says he could do that. He has acquired it on his behalf. The Chacham said, like you're saying, that no, he did not acquire on his behalf. He gives the produce he gathered to whichever poor person appears to him first.
Exactly. It's a Chacham, it goes to
Right. But I'm saying the point is that the Tanakam, that Rabbi Eliezer holds that one can gather pay on behalf of a poor person, despite the fact that it will be a detriment to the other aniyim. While the Chachamim disagree. So what do we see? We see this atefis, this idea of atefis, the balcheb, mokash chal v'achirim, is a machlekes tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's okay, and the Chachamim holds that it's not okay. That's the chayr of the machlekes. So Amar Meimer V'im Temer Papa Daf Yud Beis Amen Aleph. So he says like this. Dilmalahi. Perhaps this is not so. In other words, perhaps the Gemara says that this is not the machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, and the Gemara is going to say there are really two ways to understand this machlekes. Number one, Ad Kanei Komer Rabbi Eliezer Hasam. First, Rabbi Eliezer states his opinion only there when this wealthy guy took possession of the payah for the poor person, which he himself was not eligible to collect the payout. So, like you said, he's not allowed to. So he says maybe over there, but Eliezer holds you're allowed to. Why? Ella the migay the boy mafkel who nixay, because since if the person who collected the produce desired, he could declare as a property hefker, ownerless, and become himself a ani v'chazile, and he will become a poor person. So then he'll be fit for himself. And since he umigoi, which means since. It's not a miga like you think, it's just miga means since. And since he could have acquired the payer for himself, so too he can likewise acquire it for another person as well. But here, where the person seizes the property on behalf of the creditor, so what are you going to say? You're going to say that he can acquire for himself. He has nothing to do with the guy that
he's just mixing himself in the guy's business, but he has nothing to do with it. So maybe over there, Rabbi Eliezer is going to hold that you can't bring a raya from the case of Peah, because in the case of Peah, he has, since this guy who acquired the Peah for somebody else could have made all of his property hefker ownerless, then he would be eligible to have the payers himself. So therefore, we say migay the zachal and avshei zachal lechavri. But by the case of atefes the balchev makish v'chav v'achedim, what are you going to say, that he's also balchev? He's not a balchev. So that's one answer. Now, and the Gemara gives a second argument that that maybe the chachamim state their opinion only there, that one cannot acquire on behalf of the poor person. Why? Because because it's written clearly in the pasuk says leisa lakit la'ani. It says that you shall not gather for the poor, which we learn now leisa lakit la'ani. You shall not gather for the poor. In other words, the poor person must collect the produce himself. But here, when you're tefes the pasuk does not apply, and therefore the chachamim did not rule that the action of the third party is ineffective. So basically what the Gemara is trying to say is that this is a total different case. You could say a total different case of a classic case of atefes l'bachiv makish v'chol v'achirim. Okay, then the last thing, Rabbi Eliezer, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, for Rabbi Eliezer, what does he do with the pasuk of leisilaka? You shall not gather. How does he interpret the phrase from which the Chachamim learned that one cannot collect pay on behalf of a poor person? The Gemara says, he needs a lahaz la'ani al shalei. He requires to warn a poor person that if the poor person owns the field himself, he's not allowed to take payah from his own property. Okay, let's do a quick chazara. We'll stop for 5 minutes and then we'll continue. Okay, so we started off today. Reb Shimon says that in regards to shtaris, which are oilim bar koish la'ivdik kechavim, so the Tanakama said that when goyim sign on the shtar, it's okay, but when it comes to Gittin Nashim, v'shechur avadim will be possible. Shimon says, af elu ksheden, that even when you have a get and goyim signing the get, it's going to be kosher. A goy. So the Gemara asked, how could a goy sign on a get? La b'nei krisis ninu. So Reb Zayda says that Reb Shimon holds the shita of Rabbi Elazar, who holds Edim Mesira Karti. And since what affects the get are the Edim Mesira, so we don't really care what it's written in the shtar. The shtar is meaningless because what affects the get is the witnesses that see the husband give the get to the wife. Yeah. So the Gemara asks, but Rabbi Elazar himself says that when you have a get, in other words, when you have no get, or the get is not mezuyif, so the get doesn't hurt you. But when you have the get that itself is forged, that's going to hurt you. So my answer is in talking about what are we talking about? We're talking about that the get over here has such goyish names, like Rashi says. What was the whole gzeira? I'm worried that if I could use, even if you say that Edim Mesira Karti, I'm worried that the signatures in the get, people are going to say, okay, now I want to use those signatures, or I want to use those same Edim to be Edim Mesira, which is a big problem. So the Gemara says, okay, what's considered a goyish name? So the Gemara brought a bunch of different goyish names. So the Gemara said that it would imply that if in the case of where there's no where the names are not so goyish, so then it would imply that such a get, Reb Shimon would hold you're not allowed to use. So the Gemara says, if that's true, why not just say very clearly, but Shemesh Muvakim is possible. Why would you say these words like Hiskrel is man shnasu b'hediyat? So the Gemara says, really, that's really what the Mishnah means. It means to say, Medvar Amurim b'Shemesh Muvakim, but the Shemesh in Muvakim is Nasa makes like it was written by common goyim. The second answer is that really, when the Mishnah said this case of Lehusker El B'Zman Shnasu B'Hediyat is not Reb Shimon's words, but rather it's going back on the Tanakama. The Tanakama says, Kol Ashtari Sa'ilim Yarkoy Shal Edik Kechavim Afal Pi Shechesmeim Edik Kechavim Ksherim Chutz Megidin Nashim Shechur Avadim. So what he's saying is that we're talking about monetary documents. That monetary documents are possible only if it was written by a hediyat. That's two answers how to answer the question. Hey, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yesi says that Reb Shimon told the Chacham B'tzidin, the whole machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim on shtaris which are produced by goyish courts, that even though there's goyim that sign on it,
are kosher, even Gittin Daf and Shechur Avadim. And he says that the whole machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and the Chacham is bisman that common. In other words, it wasn't done by the court; it was done by Hadyatim. Rabbi Akiva holds it's kosher, the Chacham holds it's puzzle. The Chacham say except for Gittin Daf and Shechur Avadim. Shimon ben Gamliel says even these are kosher in a place where everybody knows Yidden do not sign on such shtaris. So you won't come to confuse and think that you could use these goyim for Edim Mesira. But in a place that you didn't do sign on it, then it will not be okay. So for the Gemara, why is that okay? Make a gzeira otu places where you didn't do sign it. So the Gemara says, names people will get confused. Places they won't. Ravina says, so the Gemara says, Ravina Savar, he wanted to say that the documents that were signed by Goyim, Armenians are okay. So Rafram told him, no, it has to be Dafka in Goyish courts, Arkois. Rava says, stories that Persians sign on, and you didn't see the transactions, you could collect from it. For the Gemara, but they don't know how to, people don't understand what the star is saying, they don't speak Persian. So the Gemara says, we're talking about a case that people do read it. You need to have stories. You need to have a ksav sheni yochel zayif. So the Gemara says we're talking about that they wrote it with afitzon, with gallnut juice. Ask the Gemara, but in every star you need to have a place that you can like make a recap of the star, and Persian stars are not like that. So the Gemara says we're talking about that they did recap it. So the Gemara says, why can you not now collect from the chosim shubadim? So he says because there's no kol. Then Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yechanan. We said Rish Lakish was Rabbi Yechanan's brother-in-law, asked him a shaila. He said, when you have Edom which are written, which are signed on the get, and their names are like the names of the goyim, what's the din? So he says that Rabbi Yechanan said we had a get that had Lucas Lus, and we machshir it. And the Gemara says Dafka Lucas and Lus, these names which are not common by Yidden, but names that could be common by Yidden, then it will not work. So then Rish Lakish asked him a question, but Gittin Aboyim Medina Sayam, and Edom are signed on there, even though the Shemus are the goyim, they're still kosher. Why? So the Chayra we see that even when there is not such goyish names, we see like Yidden, we see it is kosher. So the Gemara says over there, the reason is, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, the Brisa says clearly, another answer is that he asked him a shayla and he was pushed the shayla from our Mishnah. Okay. Then we brought another Mishnah that says when a man says, give this get to my wife for the star shichur zela avdi. So the halacha is if the husband or the adon wants to retract, he could retract. These are the words of Rameir. Chacham said he could retract by Gittin Ashim, but he can't retract by shechur avadim because zachan la'adam shlei b'fanav ve'in chavan ela b'fanav. And then the Gemara said, the Mishnah said further that if the adon wants, he could tell his servant, I'm not sustaining you anymore. But by a woman, by a wife, he can never say that. So Rameir said to him, but l'cha'ira, by taking the shtar shichur, he's passing the evet from truma if he's a kohen. So the Gemara says is no. That's the only reason why you can have the truma is not because of the fact that he has to sustain him, but because shu kinyani. Then the Gemara says Yosef Rav Huna Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah. They were sitting in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah was dozing off, and Rabbi Huna and him were talking they said from the words of the Chachamim, the fact that this shliach leilacha could serve as a shliach to let this person free, even though the adon now regrets it. So it's a detriment to the adon. Nevertheless, zachan adon shlei b'fanav. So the chayr will come out that in the case of atefes the balchayv, if a third party is going to come and take the chayv back for the malva, so the chayr should work. So the Gemara says, so he asked him, even makom shechav la'achirim. So the Gemara says, then when Yirmiyah woke up, and he says, listen, kindalach, listen, Rabbi Yechanan said, hatefes l'ba'chayv makom shechav la'achirim is like kana. You're going to say from our Mishnah, it's mashma that you could. Our Mishnah is different because when you say tnu, you're saying zchu. Our Rabbi Chisda says the chayir this machlekes of hatefes the b'chayv makom shechav la'achirim. The chayir will be a machlekes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbanan. We said like when the wealthy guy is malakit peah for the poor person, and he says harezu lepleni ani. So Rabbi Elazar says he's zoich, and the Chacham said that he can't. He has to give it to the first ani he meets. So l'chayra that will be the case of atefes the balchayv makom shechav la'achirim, that Rabbi Eliezer says that even though he's malakit for this ani, which will be a detriment to other aniyim, it still works. So Ameimar and some people say the Papa says no, it's very different. It's nothing to do with atefes the b'chayv makom shechol b'achirim. He could say like this. Really, Rabbi Eliezer says why does it work is because since he could be mafker all his nechasim to hefker and he will be zeichet it, so he will apply. He will be now applicable for payah, so maybe it works. But nothing to do with atefes the b'chayv makom shechol b'achirim. Maybe he will say that it won't work. And the Gemara says that according to the Chachamim, I have a clear pasuk. It says lo yisilakit la'ani. So the Gemara says, what does Rabbi Eliezer do with lo yisilakit? So he says he needs a for to tell me that the ani himself is not allowed to take his own payah from his own field. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll start.